Hello my friends and welcome to another video. Now this is a very special one. I don't usually put stuff like this on the channel, but this week I had the pleasure of being joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Obraxis from Unknown Worlds Entertainment himself for an interview about his time as a developer, his time at Unknown Worlds Studio, the plans for the future, and more. Now, just a few things before we jump into this. Number one, I highly recommend you guys listen to this as a podcast. It's pretty much just 30 plus minutes of us talking. There's not going to be some crazy exciting footage or anything, so I highly recommend just putting this in the background while you do something else and having a good time. The other thing is, I really want to thank you all for submitting all of your questions. There was a ton of them, and many very good ones, but unfortunately I only had a limited amount of time with Obraxis. He was very kind to take time out of his busy day to do this, and I very much wanted to respect his time, so we were quite limited in time, and I was able to kind of compress everything into 10-ish questions, which I thought you guys would find pretty interesting to hear the answers to. Now, for full transparency, yes, I do ask about Subnautica 3 in this one. I also asked about multiplayer. The reason I didn't ask more questions is, as you will hear in the video, simply because the studio is not ready to talk about the game yet, and so Obraxis would not possibly be able to do that without breaking NDA, which is definitely not something I wanted to happen. And finally, I just want to say I'm not really a professional interviewer, so I want to apologize for a bit of the jank with the recording. I tried to make it so that all of the audio is very clear and it sounds good, but I'm hoping to get better over time if I do this more. Anyways, with that, massive shout out to Obraxis. Links to his socials are down in the description. Please guys, go check them out. He posts a lot of interesting stuff about the games the studio is working on. And with that, let's just jump into it. Before, I'm going to give you a proper introduction in the video, but do you want to start with a little bit to just introduce yourself to anybody who might not be familiar with you, even though I think most people will be?
Yeah, sure. So I am known as Obraxis online, and I have worked at Unknown Worlds now since around 2014. So I've worked on Subnautica as an animator and QA lead, and same on Below Zero, and I'm now currently a community strategist on Moonbreaker.
Nice. I'm curious, if you care to share what originally attracted you to the studio.
Well, I actually had been playing Unknown Worlds games before there was an Unknown Worlds in existence. So Charlie Cleveland, the CEO and co-founder of the company, Unknown Worlds, created a mod for Half-Life 1 called Natural Selection, which was a groundbreaking game mod that was, I think, like the third most played mod back in the day behind Counter-Strike and Team Fortress 2. It was exceptionally popular. I'd never played anything like it, and I started playing that, and I wanted to get involved in that as much as possible. And towards the end of its life, as a really popular mod, I became like a playtester for it, and I just couldn't get enough of it. So I kind of just hung around the community, stuck around, and when I heard that there might be a potential Natural Selection 2 coming at some point, I absolutely wanted to be involved in that. So again, I just kind of hung around Charlie and people who were kind of working on stuff, and I kind of just never left. I've always been around. So I was QA lead on Natural Selection 2, and we put that out, and I was very proud of that, and went on to run the CDT, which is like a community development team, after Unknown Worlds kind of moved on from Natural Selection 2. So I've been involved in Unknown Worlds stuff for a very, very long time.
Yeah, fair enough. Something we talked about just before we started the recording is that you originally kind of started in more movies and animated shorts. How do you feel, or like, what was the transition like going from that to games, or were you already involved in games before that?
It's funny. Working on Unknown Worlds is my first game job. I'd never worked in games before, but whilst I was doing volunteer work for Unknown Worlds, or even before it was called Unknown Worlds, I was working in the animation industry, in like film, TV, and like ads and things like that, and I love the creativity you can do and all the different projects you can do as a freelancer in that industry. But seeing games come along as they have, and especially on Unknown Worlds, what you can do at the company, I was just enthralled and wanting to get into games, and I was just exceptionally lucky that our work kind of aligned because I'd worked on a movie called Salmon Fishing in the Yemen in the visual
Hmm.
effects department, where I'd animated some fish, and of course you can see where that's going. So yeah, that's how I managed to jump on board fully onto Unworld's animating fish to start off with.
I'm curious. So you joined the studio during, like, you mentioned it was just around when they were kind of transitioning from Natural Selection 2 to Subnautica, or was it even before that? Was it like during the Natural Selection 2
Yeah, so I
phase?
was volunteering as a QA lead for the whole of Natural Selection 2 development, or pretty
Hmm.
much most of it towards the end. And I wasn't getting paid. I was just a volunteer. The company didn't really have much money at the time, and I was doing my full-time job, animating on various things, and then I would come home and I would do almost another full-time job on Natural Selection 2, running the
Right.
QA side, running the play tests, filing bugs, making sure everything was done correctly. And that was great fun, and it was a way for me to kind of keep my foot in the Natural Selection universe, and also just see what games development was like, because I'd worked in animation for quite a while and I wanted to get into games, and I thought this could be an interesting way to get in. And then when I saw that the Subnautica project was coming along, I just happened to be worked on some animation on fish. It just kind of it all aligned, and then
Right.
they hired me officially because I was able to do the QA stuff and the animation stuff together. So that was great for me. I loved having the two different roles at the time, being able to bounce off it.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, would you say you enjoy one of the roles more? Are you more on the animation side, kind of where your passion lies, or do you still kind of try to do both?
Well, I'm not doing any real QA stuff on Moonbreaker. That is done by my good friend Iron Horse. His online name is Chris Gates.
Hmm.
He also worked with me as a volunteer on Natural Selection 2 and a little bit of Subnautica in the early stages, and he got hired fully to Unknown Worlds about a year ago or so, maybe
Right.
2 years ago, as a QA lead. So he's on that, and I did enjoy the QA stuff, but QA can be all encompassing because there's just so much to do, and especially towards the end of development on Subnautica and Below Zero, for instance, especially on Subnautica, it was like most of my work at that time was on getting the game into a stable place and making sure that it was good to go out for 1.0 and every single update and stuff. So whilst in the
Right.
beginning I did a lot more animation stuff in the beginning, towards the end of Subnautica's development, I kind of spent more of my time on the QA side because that's where I was needed the most.
I'm gonna bounce off on the QA stuff a little bit with one of the questions we had, which is there, in all the stuff, all the bugs that you've detected, is there a particular one that stands out, something funny or something that was like a bug you kept as a feature, that kind of thing?
Oh, we had a lot of funny stuff. I remember one on Below Zero, especially where if you did a certain thing in a certain order, um, the 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 your vehicles would just kind of spin into the air and would never return. Um,
Really?
yeah, I remember another bug on the original Subnautica where um, over time the fish all kind of coalesced into the coordinates 000 in the map.
Oh
So and
God.
they would be attracted to it. So you wouldn't notice at first, but over time
They would
more
just
and more fish would kind
accumulate.
of accumulate into the center of the world. So that was really funny. So yeah, there's been a lot of really funny bugs that the public thankfully have never seen, but if you played on like our public experimental versions during development, you might have caught a glimpse of some of them. This is what I love about community development, like being open development, is when we have an experimental public build, people can make videos and funny memes out of anything that happens in the game, and it's great for us because we laugh and it gets us to fix things faster, so it's great.
Right, that makes sense. Is it true? I believe, I don't know if I read this somewhere, but the fact that when you're about to die or drown in the game, the screen kind of first fades to black. Was that always before you die? Was that always an intended feature? I swear I read somewhere that it was first a bug that you guys were like, oh, that kind of works. We're gonna keep it as a feature.
I think we wanted the blackness, but the bug was that it was meant to kill you instantly as soon as the screen went black. But then there was a bug that stopped it from happening for a few seconds. Just a few seconds, which is why you have those. We saw those awesome moments when people thought they'd died, but they continued to press their button to like rise to the surface, and then like they take a big breath because they found out they survived, and it was just such a cool bug that just turned into a feature. So we never fixed that one.
It is really awesome. Definitely leads to a lot of tense moments. I can attest to that.
Yeah, it's great to see. We love seeing those.
I'm kind of curious, moving a little bit away from the QA topic. I think Unknown Worlds is very much known, and I believe Charlie even said this in an interview somewhere, where the studio tries not to become a sort of one-trick pony, where a lot of the games are very different from one another, right? Like you go from the multiplayer shooter of natural selection with the very unique elements to Subnautica and now to Moonbreaker. Could you maybe just like very briefly describe what the process is like at the studio when coming up with new games, since they're so different from one another?
So this is funny because we're still trying to figure that out. We don't have an exact process so far. We may do in the future, but we don't have one right now. In the past, it's been a lot of Charlie has an idea. He'll then kind of pitch it to people, and he'll go away and he'll kind of start development and working on that. But we're trying to get other people's ideas moving along as well at the studio. So we have done like game jams at the studio, for instance, where we've developed a bunch of games in a very short period of time. I think we did one 2 or 3 years ago. And what's cool about game jams is that the ideas are never lost. They're kind of stored in the system.
Right.
And also technology can be like made for those ideas that you would not normally think about. And what's cool about the game jams is that maybe those technologies or some of those game ideas, they might not ever come to fruition in a full version of that game idea, but maybe those ideas and that technology can go into a future Unknown Worlds game.
Right.
Like I can already see now that there are ideas that have come from our game jam work in the past, not just game jams, but just ideation and things like that that are going into future games. So yeah, really, I'm excited by game jams. I'm excited by development processes where we can get a bunch of people together and just see what comes out of it. And we also have like an internal database of game ideas that people have come up with that we can always go back to and look through. Yeah, because one thing about Unknown Worlds is that it's a pretty flat studio. So anyone can pitch a game, anyone could come up with an idea, anyone can comment on anything of anyone's at the studio. So someone working on sound can absolutely come in and critique someone working on animation, or if someone has registered has come up with some kind of idea that they can pitch it to someone else. It's pretty flat, and I really like the collaborative nature of the company. It's definitely very, very enjoyable.
It's very interesting. I find it interesting that you mentioned that kind of flat structure and anybody can come up with an idea. With that in mind, what was the process like for sort of coming up with the idea of Subnautica? Was it just, I know Charlie, I believe in a small interview, he said that it was very much inspired by Minecraft in some regards, but what was like the initial push, let's say, for the game?
I would say I can only go off my own recollection, and it has been a little bit of a while. It's almost 10 years now since
Time flies too fast.
Yeah. But I do remember we were at the Natural Selection 2 World Championship in Germany, and I was walking with Charlie like over a bridge somewhere, and he was talking about a game that he wanted to make, and he wasn't sure whether he should set it in space or underwater. And I think that's kind of around the time, around 10 years ago, maybe 10, 11 years ago, that he kind of started, something was gelling in his mind, that he wanted to do something a little bit different. And
Right.
then, of course, that turned into let's try something underwater. That became the prototype Descend,
Mm-hmm.
which was the precursor for Subnautica. It just kind of went from there, like trying something really atmospheric underwater, um, and make a little prototype internally. You then send it around the studio and say, hey, is there something here? What's it like? And it just builds upon itself more and more. If there's something intrinsic there, you can usually feel it pretty early on.
Right. Yeah, I recently had the pleasure to play some of those early prototypes, which are apparently still floating around the internet in some places. I'm
I've heard
curious.
that.
I'm curious. There's a lot of things there that are kind of interesting that for one reason or another never made it into the game. Is there anything when you look at like either the first Subnautica or Below Zero that you kind of wish retrospectively if there was more time or more budget that could have made it in?
Yeah, so for a little while in the early days, we had a kind of. We wanted the world to feel more alive and reactive to players being in the world, so that when a player would say move to an area, it would almost feel like the area knew you were there, and the
Oh,
area would react based on the player's presence and what the player was doing. And we had some early experiments where, for instance, the purple mushrooms, if you got close to them, they would actually animate and kind of shrink down to almost nothing if the player was nearby, because they were kind of almost afraid that the player
right.
was there. And this wasn't just the purple mushrooms, it would happen to a lot of other plants. You would have like maybe some color changes and stuff like that. And it just turned out that that is very, very taxing on a CPU, because there's a lot of
Right.
calculations that need to happen. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of GPU things you could do, because at that time we were using a very early version of Unity, like
Mm-hmm.
the 2013-14 version of
Yeah, yeah,
Unity.
yeah.
And there's just a lot of stuff that was a bit taxing at the time, and plus PCs have moved on a lot since then as well. So it was just something that would have been nice to do, but we haven't. We couldn't really do it. No, we couldn't really do it in Below Zero either.
Hmm. Speaking of, I do find it interesting that you mentioned the idea of having kind of the world react to you and all these different animations. Is there a particular animation or like a creature that stands out to you as being very difficult to implement, or something that you had to do a ton of revisions on?
I think the sea dragon was particularly difficult because of its size and its place in the world.
Right.
And you trying to make it fit and stay in the world, stay in its area,
Yeah.
was actually pretty challenging, and sometimes it does go out of its area, as some of you have seen. Yeah, I think the sea dragon is probably the most challenging one to kind of get a handle on. And I think it's just a combination of so many different factors that just made it a little bit difficult. But I mean, we still think it's really cool.
No, I totally agree.
Yeah.
I think everybody in the community also thinks it's a very cool one. And which speaking of creatures like the dragon or the reaper, for example, what are kind of your thoughts, or even the studio's thoughts, on the fact that the community interprets so much of the game as just straight up horror? Like, for a lot of people, the game is terrifying in a good way, right? Is this something that you feel like you've leaned to over the years, or not so much?
Well, we never set out to make a horror game.
Right.
And I don't think we designed it as a horror game. I think what we've done is, I think we've managed to, once we realized what was happening with people's fear of the unknown, the fear of the deep, dark water, the fear of monsters, I think we started to lean more towards terror,
Right.
rather than horror, because I think terror is something that people can understand and deal with once they're in a situation, whereas horror is maybe something that is a little bit too scary for people. And I actually think Subnautica is more of a terror game rather than a horror game, but I completely understand where people are coming from if it horrifies them. But I would say we've leaned more towards the terror situation, and then some people interpret that as horror.
No, absolutely. And I mean, I think to a lot of people, it's also probably the fact that, a lot of people wouldn't distinguish between them. So
Right.
people might say that it seems like a horror game, whereas in reality it's much more that they're terrified of it. Yeah, I think especially with what you said earlier about kind of being so engaged with the community and kind of working with this like almost open development plan where everybody can see the updates and you keep very engaged with the community. What are your thoughts and kind of the studio's thoughts maybe on the whole modding community and all the community projects that have kind of been coming out over the years?
Oh, we absolutely love modding. Our company was founded on a mod, so we get it. We try and support them as best we can. And I'm in all the modding discords. Donya, our community manager, she's in all of our modding discords. There's a bunch of the programmers been in touch with the modders over the years. We try not to break stuff for them, but sometimes it's just absolutely necessary, and we try to give them as much of a heads up as possible, but sometimes we're just really bad at that, and we just have to try and let them know that we love modding with Subnautica and Below Zero. We encourage them to mess with all of the stuff, and because that's what helps extend a game's life. It breathes new life into games. People can get inspired by the mods that people create. I mean, we were inspired with Natural Selection 1, all the mods that were happening around that time, so we completely get it, and yeah, we love modding.
Right, that makes sense. Have you, or has the studio ever considered official mod support for consoles?
There's consideration, and then there's
of course there's having the budget and time, right?
Well, yeah, it's the budget, the time, it's trying to figure out all of the systems. It's exceptionally difficult to do modding on consoles. Otherwise, everyone would do it.
Of course,
or loads of people would do it. And yeah, there's also a lot of like copyright stuff you have to deal with, which people don't realize. Because some mods use code from other mods, and or which license is this from, and there's just a lot of like legal stuff as well. Just it's a lot of work, and if you are if you're a studio maybe who's a lot bigger than us, it might be a lot easier. So sadly we probably won't do modding on consoles for the original games, but it's just a lot of work. It's just a lot of work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's actually good that you bring it up, because I think most people don't really understand how big is the studio right now.
We are growing at quite a considerable pace. So we are now over 60 people as a studio.
Okay.
Whereas maybe a few years, like maybe 2-3 years ago, we were about half that. So we are very like doubled in size in the last 2-3 years.
Nice. Has the recent acquisition by Krafton in any way changed things up, or has it not really changed your day-to-day, if you can speak on that?
So I would say it's not really changed our day-to-day in terms of making games, but what it has enabled us is to get more talent faster, and people who've maybe been in the industry longer. We have access to more resources, I would say. So it's been a net plus for us. So we've been able to expand much faster because of that, and so we're able to do a lot more cool stuff because of that. So it's definitely a net positive.
Right. I feel like before we continue, obviously, I tried to compress all the questions that we got from the community, which is a ton, by the way. People really, really appreciate this opportunity. And so rather than kind of poke around the Subnautica 3 question, all I'm going to ask is there anything at all that you're able to disclose? And if not, that's fine. But is there anything around the next installment that you are at liberty to say?
Well, there's certain things I can say, and there's certain things I can't say. There's a lot more things I can't say, obviously.
Of course.
Because the next game in the Subnautica universe is in development. It's not a secret. You can see it on our jobs pages, and a lot of people, if you pay very close attention, you can actually get a lot of ideas from the jobs that we posted over the last year or two. If people have been paying attention. I'm not exactly going to repeat a lot of those now, but I can give you kind of an idea of where we're at. we are using Unreal Engine 5,
Hmm.
the latest version, and it's enabling us to do some really cool stuff. So we're very excited about that. Obviously, we were using Unity on the previous games, so it's a massive difference because it's a completely different engine. So we've done a lot of internal learning. We've hired a lot of people who know Unreal already. And yeah, there's a lot of research and development going on right now with the engine.
Must be a kind of a challenging transition, right? Since you did both of the previous games in Unity.
Yeah.
Would you say, how would you say that transition has been so far? Has it been like very tough on the research side, or are you finding Unreal 5 to be relatively like easy to work with, let's say?
Well, I can only speak from observation because I'm not on that team currently.
Mm-hmm.
But from observation, I would say that it's been going pretty well. But we have to remember that Subnautica, the original Subnautica, wasn't built in a day.
Right.
Everything that we built for Subnautica, we had readily available for Below Zero, like technology-wise, tools-wise, everything. And now we're doing everything from scratch, like literally from
Right.
the very beginning all over again. So there's a lot of technology that needs to be rewritten. There's a lot of tools that need to be written and worked on. There's a lot of like shader stuff. For instance, water tech is kind of important in a Subnautica game, so that
You
all
would
needs
think
to
so.
be investigated. So that's all going to take time, and we don't really have anything ready to show anyone yet. That we're ready to talk about or show, but I would say from what I've seen so far, I am very, very excited for people, and I think people are going to be blown away when they see what we have in store.
I'm sure there will be. I want to stay on the topic a little bit. Again, this might be something that you might not be able to speak about, but I believe there was a comment by Charlie left on a video speculating about Subnautica 3, which was talking about possible multiplayer aspects, and I believe he said something along the lines of that he would be very surprised if the next game did not have multiplayer elements. Now, when it comes to multiplayer in general, what has kind of been the studio's thoughts on this in regards to both the Subnautica games, the previous ones, and kind of future games, not necessarily just Subnautica?
Okay, I can maybe say a few careful words.
yeah, you can carefully navigate around that.
Yeah. First of all, I'm being very careful with what I call the next Subnautica game. You'll notice I say it's the next game in the Subnautica universe. It is a Subnautica game, but we are not ready to talk about what we're going to call it yet. It's because we actually haven't decided internally, officially, what we're going to call it yet. So we don't want to say anything yet. So it's just Subnautica, the next Subnautica kind of thing right now.
Yeah.
In terms of like what Charlie said, very interesting what he said. He can say anything he likes because he's the CEO of the company. So
Fair enough.
He says goes. I can't confirm or deny any of that.
Okay.
But I will say that internally, we did play for a little bit of a time with the multiplayer mod, which was great fun. Really enjoyed that. So that was great fun, seeing each other almost waving and hey, come build this base together and stuff. We've watched a lot of videos about that. So, yeah, very interesting that he would say that. And I believe I did see him say that a little while ago. But like, we're gonna make the best game possible for as many people as possible.
Absolutely, and I mean, the whole community stands behind you in that, and in Unknown Worlds we trust, as I would say. I'm curious, you mentioned you don't have like an official name for the game yet. I'm curious about the previous two Subnauticas. At any point, did they have like a funny internal name that was... I know with game development, oftentimes a game will get like an internal name and it's difficult to transition to the official name because everybody in the studio keeps calling it the old thing. Was something like that a case with the first or second Subnautica?
Actually, it's funny. We did have the name Descend for a while for the original Subnautica, and then as soon as the word Subnautica came up, which I believe Brian Cummings, who's a technical artist at Unknown Worlds, I think he might have come up with the name actually, because we were all pitching different names for the game, and I think that was one of them, and it was the most voted on because we kind of do things a little democratically, where we call kind of
right.
things are thrown out, and then we all kind of vote and stuff. And I think Subnautica came from Brian, but once that was chosen, it basically stuck. It was just such a good name. It was never Descend anymore. And then with Below Zero, I think, there was the joke of Sub-Zero, which a lot of the community have also made. We also did that internally. But, there's also a very good Mortal Kombat character called Sub-Zero, so we could never call it Sub-Zero.
True.
So Below Zero was just referred to as BZ or BZ for the Brits. But I think most of us who are British on the team started calling it BZ to fit in with the Americans.
Right. No, that makes sense. Anytime, should we expect a Mortal Kombat crossover anytime soon?
Probably not.
I'm curious, just kind of slowly coming to a close. There's been a lot of, talk about Easter eggs or stuff that might be in the game that is hidden from the casual player. Is there any Easter egg or secret that hasn't been discovered yet in the games, at least that you know of?
Oh, that's a good question. Now I have to think back a few years. No, I think Subnautica 1, I think most of them have now been found.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure about Below Zero. I think on Below Zero we didn't put as many Easter eggs in there. Most of them were in Subnautica 1. I do know we want to try and get some Easter eggs in the next Subnautica. But we'll have to see.
What's the approach like with Easter eggs? I'm always curious about this. Is it just something that has to be like, you pitch it and then everybody at the studio goes like, okay, that's hilarious, we're putting that in? Or what's the process for getting them in?
Sometimes someone pitches something and everyone agrees it's really cool and it goes in. Other times someone's literally just doing it on their own, hoping that no one notices, which is usually the case. Yeah, it's usually one of those two.
Did you ever put something like that in yourself? I promise we won't tell.
I don't think I had an opportunity to. I think I attempted to when we were trying to figure out the ending for Subnautica 1, the original. We were pitching to various different endings, and one of my pitches was that just as Riley would end the sequence, like he'd go through the tunnel in his rocket.
Right.
I animated a cave crawler, a infected cave crawler, just briefly running across the ceiling as he was looking up,
like Alien.
Like Alien, to almost like start off, because I think most people know that Subnautica is kind of a secret prequel to the Natural Selection series, and it's so my thought was, wouldn't it be funny if Riley, of all the people, accidentally started the war between the Kara and the Marines, just by him bringing back a cave crawler by accident or something like that. I just thought it would be funny, and so I did an animated test for that, and it was fun, but it wasn't selected. But I still thought that was fun.
Was it not selected because they didn't like the kind of lore implication, or was it just that you didn't think the animation worked that well?
I didn't think it needed it for the ending. It was kind of all working at that point and didn't need anything extra. I just thought it would be fun for my own gratification.
No, absolutely. I kind of wish that I had stayed in, because I absolutely love that idea.
Well, in my mind, it's lore, but only my mind.
Do you, by any chance, and I mean, I don't know if this would be still under NDA, but do you happen to still have that animation anywhere?
I thought it was actually posted somewhere on one of the wikis or something. But
okay, I need to look for that now. That's great.
I might have it somewhere. I'll have to have a look.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of kind of the lore, I just have one final question for you, because this one was, I think, probably one of the most voted ones. And I don't know if you're exactly the person whose brains I should pick on lore of the games, but I can still ask, since this is kind of what the community wants to know the most. And that is, how did Marge, who appears in Below Zero, happen to survive Kara for, all those years? If that is even a question that you guys have answered yet internally, is that just something that we still have to wait to learn in the future?
I think we actually asked Tom about this, who is the original writer of Subnautica and the original writer of Below Zero,
Mm-hmm.
and we asked him, and I think he said something along the lines of, "Well, she just kept eating, like the fish,
Right.
and the fish have now been cleansed or something, and
Mm-hmm.
should eat the predators who ate the peepers, who, the hero peepers who had the little bit of enzyme in them, and so that was enough to just about keep her alive, kind of thing.
Right, that
At
makes
least
sense.
that I think that's what he said, if I remember. But we're talking a few years ago now. But I think
Of
that's what he
course.
he mentioned. But I don't think this was ever written down anywhere.
Hey, no, fair enough. There you go, guys. That's the official canon answer from now on. That's the end of my list of questions. Thank you so much for taking the time. Really, really appreciate it. Best of luck to you and the entire studio on behalf of the whole community. As far as I can tell, that's a lot of people are very excited to see anything that you guys are working on next.
Of course, we're working on a big update for Moonbreaker, which is coming out later in the summer, and of course we're working on the next game in the Subnautica universe, which we're very excited about, which we will talk about in the future at some point.
Absolutely. Do you want to plug any of your socials? I know you stream on Twitch occasionally. You also have a YouTube channel.
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on Twitter, although I don't post much on there, at Obraxis. You can find me on Instagram there too, at Obraxis. You can find me on Twitch, again, Twitch/Abraxas. I'm pretty much everywhere, unless someone's stolen my name, then I'm usually there or thereabouts. And of course, on Discord, you can find me in the Subnautica official Subnautica Discord, subnautica.gg/ yeah, you know where it is.
Yeah, I think people know. I'll leave the links to all of those down in the description. Thank you again so much for coming on. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of this one. I really hope you enjoyed. And I want to give another massive shout out to Obraxis for taking the time out of his busy day to go through these questions with me. I really, really appreciated it. And also a massive shout out to Unknown Worlds Entertainment for being such an amazing studio and continuing this very open approach to development that lets us as the community be involved as well. If you guys enjoyed the video, maybe consider leaving a like, commenting, or subscribing. All those would be very much appreciated. And if there is anybody else you would like me to get for an interview, leave that down in the comments as well, and who knows, maybe we'll see it in the future. With that, I'm gonna wish you guys a beautiful rest of the day, and I'll see you in whatever next video I make. Bye bye.